Welcome back to Goldmark TV. Today I'm going to have a very special interview with gallery artist Christopher P. Wood about a number of collages that he's been making over the last 12 months. Occasionally at the gallery we receive work that either because of its age or the way it's being kept doesn't meet our very high standards for sale. Instead of letting that work go to waste, perhaps it's a little stained or it has a torn edge, instead, we ship it off to Christopher P. Wood, who is an extraordinary collagist amongst many other skills and talents. Chris has been working with collage throughout his career, but this recent series of collages where we've been sending him some of the damaged stock that we have here has provided a really fantastic series of different projects and images that he's been producing. I'm really excited to talk to him today about what went into a lot of that work. I hope you enjoy this little insight into a very strange but wonderful way of working. Welcome back to Goldmark TV, Chris.
Thank you.
Nice to have you back.
Yeah, it's been a long time, this lockdown.
We're talking today about your some collages that you recently brought to the gallery, but also about collage more generally and how important it's been for you over a number of years. But I thought we'd start with the story of some collages that you've made recently with defective school prints that we've had.
Yeah, yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about how that happened?
Well, I mean, it's a fairly, I suppose, we're in a kind of fairly unique position in that, you know, as a gallery, you're able to pass over to me lots of interesting defective prints and collage material. And on the occasion of one of my visits, Fiona gave me about 150 defective school prints. And actually, they presented quite an interesting problem. I mean, we could have just sort of ripped them up and used the colours and the shapes and the forms of them in sort of making collage. But on this occasion, I think there was something about the quality of the lithography and the quality of the prints, the age of them, and the fact that they're so well known, and they're, in a sense, such seminal images for a lot of kids. You know, who probably saw them pasted on their school walls, and you know, I think I probably saw them when I was a kid. I can imagine being at junior school in 1965 or something at age 4 and seeing some of these prints, because somehow they're kind of familiar. And it was that sort of generic familiarity with them that sort of struck me as something so strong that it could be used. You know, it could be usurped. And because I had so many sort of duplicate copies of the prints, it meant that I could cut up these prints and I could add on to the originals, so I could change them. And so the idea became about creating a new kind of school print, a reformed school print, if you like, which was sort of irreverential but reverential at the same time, and sort of paid homage to the ingenuity and the quality of the lithography, but at the same time created something completely new and a bit kind of maverick. They kind of irreverent in a reverential way, and I found it a terribly absorbing process. It was perhaps slightly different from my normal collage process in that the cutting was very, very exacting. You know, I used a lot of scalpel blades, and I bought some very expensive hairdressing scissors, very, very sharp, and you can really turn corners with them. Yeah, very, very fluidly. And they were really useful in that they could cut so precisely around things that I could then reapply these cutouts to a sort of base print almost invisibly. And it was a really interesting process. And I read a lot about the school prints, and I got to know exactly which kinds of papers they were printed on. You know, I could literally tell you which school print is which with my eyes shut, just feeling the paper.
Yes, I that.
And I can tell you the Americans had the best paper. If there were images, they had the best paper, which is a kind of cliche, I suppose, that Americans would have the quality gear. And some of the prints are really difficult to cut because of the paper. I noticed that the European series with Henry Moore and Matisse, they were all printed on the same paper, which was very, very white. You know, had the sort of effect of yellowing at the edges with age. So it was interesting, and some were really hard to do, and others, you know, like the Henry Moore, I just had a ball with it every time I started it, you know, and luckily there were about half a dozen damaged Henry Moores, so yeah, I had a great time with that.
What really struck me looking at them, because there's a real breadth in what you've done with them, and some of them you've gone to town with, and they're fabulous. They are wacky and over the top, and then there are others that are very subtle. And what struck me is, and I guess this reflects partly, like you said, on the paper, on how thin it was, because it's all wartime material, which helps make it sort of blend in, makes it feel like like you're actually looking like that's how it was composed originally. But also it tells you something, the way that you've done it tells you something as well about the original images, because even though there's a huge range of them, there's a huge breadth and difference in them between those that were very very happy to sort of stick with their particular style, and others who were obviously pandered more to the fact that they were making prints for kids. So you get this very strange range of images. It's telling that even though you've got this huge range, they do all fit together. It feels, even though some of the images that you've made feel really out of place, you know, something like the granny's head being sawn in the Michael Roth. Even though it feels very out of place, it doesn't look it, doesn't feel it. There's some kind of quality that unites all of them, and it's not just the paper stock, is it? There's something else about that time, I think.
Yeah, there's a kind of spirit of the age kind of feel about it, and there's I mean, it was very, very interesting, because I got to know the prints really well, and the draftsmen and the artists who made the draftswomen as well, that made the pictures, and one did get a huge sense of that pre-war, post-war art college world, you know, in which it's a very, very different kind of art training, in which the artists got. You know, you got one generic art schooling, and you chose whether you were going to be a graphic artist or a fine artist, a painter or a sculptor from that. So it wasn't the kind of specialist training that we have now. But one thing was evident throughout, and that was, you know, draftsmanship. And in some, you know, you sort of marvelled at it, at the complexity of the images they were using. And others, you recognise the weakness of some of the drawing. You know, kind of interesting. There were some prints which it's funny, there were some prints which I just couldn't stand by. I just didn't, you know, I kind of wish they'd go away, kind of thing. Particularly the one by, I think it's Adolf Dern, the American, the Cowboys. Oh, I just, no, it just kind of, I know some of them kind of turn my stomach in a way, you know. I don't know whether it's that kind of childhood thing where you think, I've seen this outside the headmaster's office, you know, it's that kind of. And others, were just full of light, and I was, you know, and I still love, you know, I mean, you know, some, you know, the Felix Kelly. You know, I chopped it up and you know, was very irreverent in a very simple way to that. I just thought it was a superb piece of drawing and lithography, and so it's a really interesting. I mean, the other thing that is the format of them. It's so strange, that panorama, and you see that some artists took to it or understood it, and others just really struggled.
Yes.
In fact, somebody like Matisse just didn't even bother with it at all. You know, he just stuck it in the middle.
Yeah.
But I really sympathised with the artists, you know, having to deal with that compositional format, because it's not easy, because it is a kind of panorama. So it's difficult to place a subject in the middle of that somehow, because the eye has to move, you know, all around. So in some respects, I was able to help some of the artists out by being so outrageous with the composition and so surreal that I could actually fill in the blanks in a way that were left, you know.
That's something that Roger, who works here at the gallery and designs all of our catalogues, all our material, that's something that he said in the past, and I think he's talked to you about it as well, about when you're trying to set a cover for a catalogue, suddenly you realise how often artists favour certain sides or certain formats of an image, and often it's I think he said the left-hand side. So when you come to then set a catalogue, where what you need is an image with something strong on the right-hand side so that you can wrap around, you find there's very few things that often fit that shape, that format. Yeah,
it's really interesting. I mean, I often find, if I'm figure drawing, the profile, my natural thing is for the profile to face left, because I'm right, and it's somehow much easier to draw a profile like that rather than like that and you know, I noticed this particularly because I've just been printing etchings, and of course they're mirror. So I've been printing these thinking, no, that's weird, but you know, the profile's facing the right for a change. Oh, duh. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's quite a challenge. You know, and you know, Henry Moore sort of laid out his sort of sculptures across that, so that you read it like that. And then I'm thinking something like the Chas Mosley, which is the ballet scene, which is the stage at one hand and the audience at the other, and all the actors on the stage. Print just kind of almost stops in the audience. So there isn't anything for him to sort of wrap his pencil around, in a sense, but a sea of faces. So you know, things like that, you could see that it must have been a real struggle, you know, to make the composition work.
Something a bit, and I don't know again if it's partly just the quality of the printing and the lithography, but there's something a bit surreal in them anyway, even before you start messing around with them, which also seems to lend itself to that kind of, you know, something about all these clowns and harlequins. There's something very, very strangely, quite typically sort of British eccentric actually about them.
Yeah, and I think they were done. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but right in the middle of that kind of revival of British surrealism, weren't they? Really, from about 1930 through to 1950, you had that strong sense of English surrealism. You know, and I think in some ways that's still with us, you know, oddly. And you can certainly feel it very strongly in those prints, that there is an otherworldliness to all of the prints, which I think it's because the artists were largely drawing on their imaginations to make those, and so you know, that otherworldliness comes through. I mean. Yeah, and I mean, I was thinking of Michael Rothenstein, which I think is a really interesting print. But the figures in that are kind of Doctor Who-like strange. They almost like have their lips sewn up. They're kind of Freddy Krueger type characters, which is why, on those particular collages, they became very macabre. Granny's head being sawn off.
Well, they do look like mobsters, don't they? They've all got their hats and their coat collars pulled up, and yeah. Yeah,
I think if you walked into a load of lumberjacks, and they look like that, you would shit yourself, wouldn't you? I would. I mean, think I come to Royston Vasey and something nasty is going to happen to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were great fun to do. And I mean, what's interesting is the other thing is that with some of the prints, I'm thinking particularly of the Julian Trevelyan, the harbour scene, the language was so distinct.
Mm.
The only way I could really invisibly work on those was by actually using Julian Trevelyan's prints, if you like, by cutting up other prints and using them on top.
Mm.
So there was that problem as well of because I was trying to create a seamless kind of scene in which people, even if they knew the school prints, they would have to do a second take.
Yes.
To see them. And with the Trevelyan particularly, you could only do that by reusing the Trevelyan, which I think shows the uniqueness of his particular language.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the stronger school prints for me because of that.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, they're a bit bonkers in places.
Speaking of sort of distinct voices that you've been working with in collage, you've also been doing a lot with Miró recently. You've got a lot of Miró material, and we've had a number of different things from you, both prints that have been laid down and also some sort of series that you've been working on that involve Miró. Has it been getting because he's another person who I think, like you, there's very much a surrealist bent, but it wouldn't have called himself surrealist with a capital S, I suppose.
No. Do you think surrealism is one of those kind of labels that people apply generically to kind of imaginative work?
Yes. Yeah.
Because I for a long time I've kind of really been shy of any kind of label, and particularly when you're interested in the sort of perennial imagination in a very sort of serious and intellectual way, in the way that Blake was. People often describe things as fantasy, which is a kind of trivial side of imagination.
Mm.
And I think that Miró, I do kind of identify with Miro's imagination and with the poetry of his work.
Mm.
And with the great joy, I think Miró, maybe of all artists, it is the most joyful, consistent joyful, and in a profound way. Do you know, like the Messiaen's Taranglia?
Yes.
The joyfulness that's in that, really exotic and profound. I see that in Miró.
They do kind of wash into you in the same way that I remember seeing the Taranglia Symphony. I was quite young, actually. I think I was only 9 or 10 at a concert with my dad, and it was a very mixed audience, and a quarter of them walked out.
Still,
but it's I don't think I've ever experienced music quite like that. Never had a concert that's quite hit me literally like that. And Miró does have that kind of quality to it. Also, and this is why I think it's interesting to talk to you about, particularly as you've been working with it in collage. I always feel with Miró that he's one of those abstract artists where you really can't, once you start trying to move things around or omitting things, you realize how much it's all held together and how much that apparent sort of childish series of gestures and spatters and symbols, whatever, they feel like they're just being chucked there. But when you start trying to move them, you realise there's a kind of frisson there, and you ruin it if you move them. And I wondered how that felt for you, because you spoke about some recent collages you made where you said they just seemed to fit, they just seemed to work. It didn't matter what you did, it came to life.
Yeah, well, I've done 2 sets of work on Miró really this summer and autumn, and the first set were a series of abandoned covers of Dairy Ala Miró, which were originally lithographed, by Miró, and so I worked with a kind of Miró on Miró, and tried to. The interesting thing about those, they were, by the time the covers were open wide, they were the same format as the school prints. And yeah, I tried to use bits of Miró and create something again that was kind of seamlessly Miró, and I think I did that. I think I was aided by the fact that a lot of attention was paid to the back cover. There was a certain amount of balancing that needed to be done when you were given the whole sort of picture plane. I think you're absolutely right about Miró. I mean, it's almost an impossible task to out Miró.
Yes.
You know? And I don't sort of pretend that I've done that in any way, because, I was adding things to it and changing it and making it believable. But at the same time, I was kind of marveling at the expertise of Miró to be able to create these nuances of composition and space, which are completely new. I once took some students to take Britain, I think it was at the time, when Miró had 3 of his sort of cobalt blue paintings from the early 60s hanging. And one of them, I think they're about 4 by 5 foot, or perhaps a little bit bigger. One of them is just a completely blue with a tiny line, black line that runs up through the middle, and then a little splash of yellow paint. And that's all there is on this. And it's one of my favourite paintings of all time. And I was extolling the virtues of this to the students, who are just sort of scratching their head, and doing that thing that everybody does, which is, well, anybody could do that.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to them, I think this is probably the most dangerous painting that's ever been made, because it was so austere, and yet so beautifully balanced, and yet so funny at the same time. So Miro's always been really, really close. So the last time I was with you, Mike and Fiona passed on the complete catalogue resin array of all Miro's lithographs. You can see some of the pages here. It was a loose signature affair, as the French were very keen at doing. Beautifully printed, with all these fantastic images. And I must have had, well, there's still a lot of these left over. The whole of the contents of the four or five volumes of lithographs in this big pile in my studio, and I was looking at them for a long time, thinking, what the hell am I going to do with these? Having just completed the school prints, I realised that it's rather like the loaves and the fishes. I had 8 baskets full of cuttings of all kinds of beautiful shapes. Because of course, when you cut something out, and you take a hell of a long time cutting it out, you're left with the shape, which is, the negative, which is equally beautifully cut out. Yeah. And I just was taken with the idea of working with Miró on a set of collages. So my intention was just to use the school prints, just to use the throwaway bits that were on on the studio floor and in boxes and bags and all around, and just channel Miró in a way. Kind of, if I could take one lithograph at a time and just carve one or two pieces onto that lithograph that would create something which was completely new, but would still have the spirit of Miró, would be a kind of homage. And I thought about Miró all the time when I was making these, and you know, it might be my hubris, but I thought, I bet he'd really like the fact that I'm doing this.
Yeah,
because it's so anarchic. But I have to say that having spent nearly 2 months working on the school prints every day for hours and hours and hours, I was just kind of in the zone with the colours of the school prints and the Miró, and it for me it was making these things was like breathing. It was that simple. I would turn the page, find a Miró image, and I would just look around the studio, and a piece would shout out me, and I would pick it up, and I would just glue it onto the lithograph, and 9 times out of 10, it worked. You know, it's a very, very profound experience. It's difficult to describe, but I was just in the zone. I'm sure I couldn't do that now, and I think that often when you make work, you know, you get to a place where the work is sort of making you, and that's how I felt with the school prints and with consequently with the Miró. So I think they're some of the most profound collage statements that I've made, even though they're probably the simplest things I've ever done.
There's a great breadth to, I mean, we use the word collage, but it's really, we're talking about lots of different things here, because you've got the school prints, which for me, because they blend so seamlessly, they've got a feeling. They reminded me of, when I was looking at them, of Max Ernst and Une Semaine de Bonté, with those fantastic pictures of sort of Victorian birds. Yeah. And they have that kind of, because it's all compressed, it feels like it all belongs there. And then there are some of the things that you've done with Miró had that same feel, but then others, it was obviously collage. The point of it was that it was collaged elements. And I know you've also worked with your own material as collage, and also with photographs. You've done some really interesting things with photographs. Are you kind of aware, and do you feel and react differently with those different kinds of collage, where you're being more obvious about the fact that you've got material stuck together, and where you're less obvious, or does it all sort of is it all an instinctual thing?
I think the school prints were kind of very different in the way that I worked with those. It was quite kind of specific in a way, because in some respects, although you couldn't plan in advance, I kind of knew how I wanted those to look. Whereas I think in probably the majority of the collages that I've made up to date, it's almost the kind of reverse of that I want. You know, I want to be sort of surprised. I want to take, it's really a case of being surprised, and the interesting thing, I suppose, again, you know, you enter the zone, if you like, making these collages, and you know, collage probably seems from the outside to be quite a chaotic sort of business of cutting, but in actual fact, it's just as precise as painting or any of the other aspects of visual art, you know. And it's interesting, when a collage is finished, it looks like it couldn't be any other way. And people have said to me, "Oh, you know, it's a chancy business, making a collage." But for me, it isn't. You know, because the thing has its own life and kind of speaks to you at the end, and you know that there's nothing more to be added to it. You know, and it reminds me of somebody saying the same thing to Francis Bacon. asking him about the role of chance in, you know, the figurative elements of his painting. And he just said, well, the chance does not play a role in this, because that is, it's meant to be, and that's how I want it to be. And there's no, when it's finished, there's no chance involved.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same with collage.
Do you? It's obviously particularly when you're dealing with something like the school prints, where they're so the paper is so thin, and you're working with quite fine lines between wrecking it and not.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of technical aspect to it, but do you feel a different kind of liberation with collage, because you are getting away from the technical aspects of putting paint on canvas, or, you know, the various technical aspects of printmaking? It feels to me like it's very sort of purely composition. You've got these pieces, it's getting them in the right place so that there's something happening.
Yeah, I think it's very, very liberating in that way. You know, that you in a sense, the technical aspect of the image is already there, because you've got the bits and pieces. You know, I quite often use my own drawings and bits of my own sort of discarded canvases have ended up on collages, and obviously printed proofs and things. And quite often, you know, I've used material that's come from discarded prints. You know, so there's sort of the technical aspect. Yeah, the technical aspect is sort of covered in a way, and it is purely that beautiful act of kind of aesthetic balance and creating sort of meaning. So it's almost like the purest form of image making in a way, because you straight in at the kind of nuance of using these bits of things that already exist. And particularly when I've there's a series of collages which started off with a torn up Leon Kossoff etching, and another series with torn Hockney etchings. In fact, there was a whole series I did, which was based on it was the water being thrown at the prince from the Hockney Grimms.
Yeah.
And they were really successful. And when I brought them down, I asked Mike if he had any more Hockneys that were torn, damaged, and he said there weren't any. And then somebody brought, I think it was the Witch in Her Garden, and Mike tore it up in front of me and gave it to me. Said, "Is that damaged enough?" I should have asked for a Picasso. But it's interesting having those starting points, which are particularly strong, and integrating those into a Chris Wood collage.
You mentioned Hockney. He's famously worked with collage, and particularly with collage photographs. And that's something that you've been working on as well. Is that a more recent? I know over the last few years we've seen a number of different, very interesting photographic collage things coming from you. Is that something that you've always played with, and it's now that it's emerging, or is that something new?
No, it's fairly new, and it started off, in fact, when I moved to this house about 5 years ago. I found a box of discarded photos in the attic, obviously of some family that had lived here at some point, and I tried to track them down so I could return them, but everybody had kind of disappeared, and I was kind of left with them, and I just thought, well, actually, I'd quite like to again do something with these which retains the integrity of the original image, but somehow becomes something different. And those initial photo works, I was very interested in the point at which the very specific image became a Chris Wood. And I was doing unusual things to the photographs, like I was putting through a printmaking process. So there were you know, there were some with aquatint on them and some with dry point, and I was using old plates that I was inking up and running the photos through the press with those on. So the initial starting point was an original photograph, then with some form of intaglio on the surface, and then applied oil paint after that, sort of balancing and reckoning the image up. And I found it incredibly absorbing, and there were, not every image worked, but the ones that did work, I thought were very, very strong images. And it was a kind of more, it was a sort of related to collage, the way I was using it. But after those initial ones, I tried quite a few things and bought several collections of old photographs. And gradually the language sort of developed. And the most recent series, probably the strongest, which again sort of treat the photographic surface in a very different kind of way. You know, there's and they're very difficult to describe. Actually, they're sort of represent kind of liminal zones. They're landscapes with other bits of landscapes cut into, but so seamlessly, a bit like the school prints in a way, that so seamlessly cut into one another that at first glance you just read it as a photograph of this. And in fact, I've just bought another incredible bunch of photographs on eBay, 100 12 by 16 photographs that some amateur photographer has taken of the east coast of Yorkshire, a lot of Whitby. There's some amazing photographs, and I'm sort of looking forward to getting to work on those. It's certainly be the largest sort of images on. But it's funny, I look for a specific kind of photograph. It's not just any old bit. But again, it's that sort of business of creating something mysterious, something that's not readable immediately in the way that people might normally think that a photograph should be.
And you have that added benefit of the fact that we've been trained to look at photographs now, and like you said, your eye doesn't immediately register the difference. I remember looking at pictures of Hockney's the what's it called, the Pearl Blossom Highway, and only realizing the longer you look at it that actually some of the corners where he's extended the sky, they're actually photographs of the landscape, but he's had to turn them upside down so that the sky all matches. And it's only, you don't read it, you read it immediately as this real or true image, or whatever those words mean. And then it takes some time for you to kind of to realize actually, no, that's not what's going on. It's very easy to be tricked in that.
Yeah, very easy. I think the photo works are kind of important, stepping stones from painting to collage. So they fit very neatly into some of the areas which I've been really interested in working, and even I've started to make short films as well now, and that's an interesting sort of process as well. But it's in a sense I'm just trying to integrate everything, so there's printmaking on the photographs, and there's oil paint on the photographs, and there's a collaged element. So in a sense they sort of fit very neatly into all of the activities that I'm trying to engage in, and that in turn feeds back into painting. So I've been considering how I could make a painting which is heavily influenced by the approach to making collages. And I'm kind of excited about the possibilities for my own painting through doing, and I think that's a really important thing for an artist to be doing all the time, simulating their painting process.
Do you use collage in that way? Because I know you've spoken in the past about sometimes using the excuse me, about sometimes using the break from using printmaking as a break from painting, or as a refreshing.
Yeah.
Collage do that too. Do you seek it out at certain points?
Yeah, I think so. I think particularly the older you get, I mean, I think it's really important to continue to trip yourself up and to challenge yourself. And you know, there are a lot of artists who really sort of stop developing, you know, in their mid careers and stick to a certain kind of work. And I think I've always admired those artists that continue to grow and sort of challenge themselves, you know, and whose maybe their last works are the greatest, you know, because of that kind of evolution. So I think it is important, and particularly as I've got older. I mean, the first maybe 50 years of my life, the first sort of 30 years of my career, more or less painting solidly, with little breaks for printmaking as a kind of guilty pleasure. But really, in the last 10 years, I've decided to make integrate all of those activities into the expression of one idea, you know, or the themes of my work. And by doing that, I found fresh ways to paint and to express myself. So all the time, you know, I've got ideas sort of lining up in my mind that need some attention. So I'm already sort of thinking about the paintings I'm going to make early next year. Yeah, I think it is really it's a really difficult thing to do, because it's risky every time you change direction. But at the same time, I think it just feeds the fire. So I still feel like a little kid, really, and often behave just like a little kid.
Do you? I sometimes think about, because collage is one of those things where, although it almost certainly was happening before the start of the last century, before the start of the 20th century, it's really the 20th century that's seen it.
Yeah.
And so much has changed since those first years and now, and about how bombarded we are with images and visuals, and, you know, just thinking about scrolling down an Instagram feed or a Facebook feed, how much that is collage in a way. Do you think it's harder to make collage that makes an impact because we're so used to being visually rich, but, you know, having so many things around it?
Yeah,
100 years ago.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's one of the reasons why I use my own original things on my collages, and why it's very, very important actually for me to be using torn Hockney etchings, torn Kossoff etchings. You know, I've used Miró and Parker, and, you know, there's a whole groups of, you know, because there's an authenticity and a uniqueness to those bits and pieces, which is missing from those kind of more superficial notions of collage.
Yes.
So I aim to give the collages that I make sort of poetry and presence through the presence of these kind of authentic pieces of art, you know, that they're in the already have that kind of imbued in them.
Yes.
And I haven't, for the most part, ever made collages which are reconstituted magazines.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't really appeal to me. I think you're right. I mean, I think that there's a kind of banality to that. Whereas I hope the collages that I make, you know, they're well, what I'm saying is actually that my collages are made up of very, very precious things. They're bits of my drawings and paintings cut up specifically or torn up for collage, and they're bits of these other beautiful, precious prints that you know, the gallery passes me over, which have lost their value because they're torn or smudged, dirty, or mount stained. So it's sort of giving it's like a very, very precious sort of mosaic in a way.
Yes.
Yeah. And the form of them is unique, because of those elements. So I agree with you, and I think that's and I think I instinctively knew when I started to make collages that they would have to be made up of amazing pieces of precious stuff to that kind of authority and clout.
It's been a real joy talking to you today about these.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for giving us an insight into what's gone into them. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, well, thanks, Max. Anytime. I really enjoyed talking to you. Yeah, speak soon, mate. Take care. Love to everybody. Bye.